I used to have a special paper cutter that I would use on my resume to give the paper round edges. Taking the extra time to do this gave these documents a more refined look. Round edges are difficult to achieve with traditional HTML because you have to use small graphics that mask out part of a background. With CSS3's border radius property, we can easily achieve the result with a minimum of code and very little fuss. In this section, I'll also show you a trick to create small triangles to make your boxes have arrows that can point to other elements. Our HTML file starts pretty simple with a box and some text typed into it. The box also has a block quote tag in it because this is technically a quote. I've also added a padding of 15 pixels to make sure the text has a little bit of breathing room. Finally, I added some color and some stylings to the font so it will stand out a little better. Adding a border radius is quite easy with CSS3. Use the WebKit border radius property and you assign a value right here. That's essentially the diameter of a circle that is in the corner of the box that you want to change. So by adding a 10 pixel WebKit border radius here, we've given our entire box a 10 pixel round edge. We can also specify any one of the sides individually by typing in the longer and slightly more cumbersome WebKit border bottom left radius and its cousins, the bottom right, of course. And I'll make this one dramatic so you can see it. And the top left. And the top right. You could achieve a lot of effects with just border radius properties. If you don't want to type in each one of these values individually, you could use a shorter notation by typing in different values for every one of the four corners. Now, it's a little bit hard to remember how these values are organized, so I like to use a mnemonic called trouble to help me remember the order. Starting from the top left of the screen, the values are the top left, the top right, then the bottom right, and the bottom left. They go in clockwise directions starting from the top left. And you can modify these values to make adjustments to each side of the border radius. Now, one thing that you have to be careful is not all iOS devices will understand this shorter notation. So for a lot of iOS devices, you'll have to use the longer notation. It's a little bit more of a pain, but it works. All right, now we'll add a little arrow that will allow you to point this element to something to the left of it. Now to do that, we're going to add another div down here. So this is going to be another element. And we're going to give this element a class of arrow because it's what it's going to look like when we're finished with it. So we're going to need to add a class of arrow here. And the first thing we need to do is make sure that that arrow that we're going to draw has no size. We're going to create an object that is just really for borders without any content inside. So we're going to change everything that could be construed by a browser as a size to 0. Now we're going to give these some borders, but we're going to use a shorter notation, which is still compatible with all browsers. Now we're going to use the keyword transparent here, which is a valid keyword to make something have an opacity of 0 or just be transparent. Now temporarily change the color of this border so you could see it appear right here. So you could see that by setting this border to a color of yellow, you can actually see it on screen. Now what we want to do is actually match the color of the background, but we'll do that in a minute once we finish typing in all the last of the borders here. All right, so by typing in 2 of the borders as transparent, we have managed to make a perfectly looking triangle that points to the left. Now, I want that triangle to actually be the same color as the background. So I'm going to change this color from yellow right now to the color of the background. The next thing we need to do is to position this where we want it to be. So we don't really want it to be inside the box. We want it to be outside the box and to the top left of the screen. So to do that, we're going to change this position attribute to absolute. There you can see it. It's outside of the box now. And we're going to need to change its physical position Now, the reason it's not showing up is because we have told this element to be absolutely positioned to the top left of the window. Anytime you set the position of an element to absolute, it checks to see if any element before it is positioned relative. In order to position this element relative to the box that it's contained in, I'm going to need to change the box positioning to relative. Once I do that, this object, the arrow, is actually positioned relative to the container box, and these values will actually position the arrow wherever I want it in relationship to the original container. So if I move this up out of the way, actually move to the left 20 pixels, I can move it up or down by adjusting these values right here. And I can position it anywhere in relationship to the container rectangle. Otherwise, it's positioned relative to the window itself. In this movie, you learn to create custom round borders for your box elements. And I also show you a trick for creating a triangle element that you can use with your boxes. Plus, we also learn about the positioning attribute. All these tricks are going to be useful as we continue to build upon the complexity in our CSS.